I finally watched Wild in the Country, and wow. I went into this film completely blind, but by the time the credits rolled, I had realized something I honestly wasn't expecting. I've been told for months to watch this film, to see the icon that is Elvis in this film, and I'm so glad I did. Let's talk about it. But before we do that, hello, my name is Cassidy Krieger from Hollywoodland Photos. This is where we explore the people, films, and stories that shaped Hollywood. If that's your kind of thing, I'd love to have you here, so please subscribe. And another quick housekeeping note. Last week, I shared a little bit about my MS journey, and I received so many lovely comments telling me some personal stories about their own MS journeys or people they know. Living with MS is bloody hard. I was diagnosed at 23, so I've been living with it now for 8 years, and it's there are some great days, but there are some really hard days too. So if I ever go quiet on here, just know I'm probably having a hard MS week, but I'm so grateful to have found this really lovely community on here. I have a massive community on Instagram and on TikTok and Facebook, but the community here seems really community-like. So I'm very grateful to have kind of come into this Elvis community as well. I've grown up with Elvis. I've loved him all my life, but to discover more about him this year especially has been a really lovely journey. So thank you all for accepting me and watching my videos and your kindness last week about my MS journey. It's not always that easy to talk about. And if I ever slur my words, please know it's MS. I haven't had a drink before recording. It's my MS. So thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate you. So if you're new here, welcome. But if you're not, you know that over the past few months, I've been talking about Elvis Presley's acting career. As an actor myself, I always love watching actors from any time period perform the craft. But with Elvis, it's especially fascinating to me because I hadn't really discovered it before. I grew up with Elvis's songs, with his music, but not so much his movies. So watching his work has been a really lovely discovery for me. We've talked about King Creole, we've moved on to Flaming Star, and after every single video I make about his acting, there is one recommendation I keep seeing, which is you have to watch Wild in the Country. And after Flaming Star, it felt like the next obvious step because by 1961, Elvis had already surprised critics with two genuinely great dramatic performances. And there was growing belief that given the right material, he could keep developing as an actor. An Academy Award nomination might not be that crazy out of the realm. He had that natural ability. And with technique that grows over time, that's where things go. And looking back now though, Wild in the Country, if you look at his filmography, Wild in the Country almost feels like the last chapter in that kind of story before Hollywood took his career in a very different direction. So I went into this film having not read any reviews. I didn't know anything about the production, and I somehow managed to avoid finding out there were any songs in it. So that was a surprise when that happened. But the first thing I wrote down in my notebook wasn't about the story. It simply said, oh my God, it's Elvis. And I feel like that's always my reaction when I see Elvis Presley on screen, whether he's singing or whether he's acting, whatever it may be. It's always like a reaction of, oh my God, it's Elvis. I think because he's such an icon of the time that it's hard to, when you first see him, to try and wash that away. And it sounds so obvious, I know, but it ended up being one of the most interesting parts of watching the film for me because I made a discovery. I'd spent months talking about Elvis as an actor and genuinely wanting to judge his performances on their own merits. But yet my first instinct, as it always is, was to see Elvis Presley before I saw the character Glenn Taylor. And it made me wonder whether audiences in 1961 ever really had the chance to do any differently. Elvis, at that point, had become such a cultural phenomenon that disappearing into a character was probably one of the hardest things he had to do as an actor. But then looking back, what surprised me the most was how naturally that feeling disappeared. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly when it happened because there wasn't some kind of moment where it clicked. But somewhere along the way, I stopped watching Elvis and started caring about Glenn Taylor, the character. I wanted him to succeed. And this might be one of the reasons why I was able to escape into Glenn's world, and was one of the things I admired most about watching this performance was how naturally Elvis fit into Glenn's world. He never feels like a movie star pretending to be an ordinary man. He knew what it was like to dream about a different life, and whether he consciously drew on those experiences or not, Glenn Taylor never felt like a performance. He just simply felt real watching him. Another lovely surprise for me in this film was Hope Lange, who I thought was absolutely wonderful as Irene. She's one of the first people that genuinely believes in Glenn, and while everyone else sees his mistakes, Irene sees his potential, and because of that, you completely understand why he falls in love with her. I loved their relationship. I think it was the highlight of the film for me. It isn't built on grand romantic gestures or sweeping declarations of love. Instead, it grows through conversations, encouragement, and trust, which is kind of, I think, how most real life relationships build. So by the time Glenn tells Irene he loves her, it feels completely earned, and the audience kind of wants to feel it too. Then there's a scene where Glenn walks into Irene's hotel room and tells her that he loves her and kisses her hand, and hello Christmas. I loved it. Not because it was some huge, sweeping, romantic Hollywood movie moment, but because it felt so genuine, and I was like, oh, I wish I was living in the 60s and Elvis would walk into my hotel room and tell me that he loved me. It just felt like two people that had slowly fallen in love. Hope Lange is extraordinary there. She barely says anything, yet you can feel and see every conflicting emotion passing across her face. She loves Glenn. She understands how complicated their relationship has become, and she's trying to reconcile those feelings without saying very much at all. And there was one moment that is still staying with me. I watched this film a couple of nights ago now, but when I was looking back over my notes and writing this script, there was one moment that I don't know if you'll agree with this, so please tell me. There's one moment where Irene's telling Glenn about his writing and how he has this natural ability and it's something that can't be taught. And I remember thinking to myself when I watched it, that's exactly how I feel about watching Elvis act. I don't think Elvis is the most technically polished actor of his generation. I think to say that would be a lie, but I don't think he needs to be. Technique can be learned. We can all go to acting school, and experience comes with time, but instinct is much harder to explain and something that very few people have, and instinct is what Elvis had. Watching Wild in the Country, I never felt as though Elvis was trying to impress me or impress the audience. He simply understood Glenn Taylor and wanted to just get his story told. So that being said, obviously I don't think Wild in the Country is a perfect film. I don't think it's Elvis's best film by a long shot. I found parts of the first half a little slow, and there were moments of the story kind of seemed to lose its momentum. But I found that as the story kind of went on into the second half and the third act, that became less of an issue because I became so invested in Glenn and Irene's relationship. I didn't really mind them taking their time. But even so, I can understand why the film received some criticism when it was released. But after finishing the film, I started to read about the production, and suddenly a lot of my criticisms made sense because legendary playwright Clifford Odets had originally been hired to write the screenplay. But just 2 weeks before filming began, 20th Century Fox fired him, leaving director Philip Dunn to finish the script while preparing to direct the film. What? So no wonder the film can feel disjointed in parts because the original screenwriter, why? What? Hollywood is a business before it's a creative place. Business first, creative 10th. I also came across a story that completely changed the way I looked at one of my favorite parts of the film. As we know, I love the relationship between Glenn and Irene because it never feels rushed. Even though I complained about the pacing of the film, I'm kind of happy that didn't feel rushed. But apparently director Philip Dunn noticed that Elvis was struggling to find the exact right tone for their romantic scenes together. So rather than giving him another acting note, he asked Elvis to listen to Bach's 5th Brandenburg Concerto, which I think as a director is so smart to have one of the greatest musicians of all time. Instead of giving him an acting note that he'd probably put in his head and overthink and be like, how do I do this? Listen to music, feel it in your body, and then come back to me as Elvis Presley who feels every bit of music in his body, and let's see what happens. So Elvis listened and came back and said to Philip, hey man, now I get it. And they filmed that scene in one take, and that must have been the scene that made me go, hello Christmas. There was one thing, however, that kept pulling me out of the story. As I said at the beginning of this video, I had absolutely no idea Wild in the Country contained musical numbers. I thought I'd be sitting down into a quiet character drama, becoming more and more invested in Glenn Taylor's story, and then suddenly Elvis starts singing. My immediate reaction, hang on, what? It wasn't that I disliked the songs. Don't get me wrong, any Elvis song is going to make me happy. They're great songs, but I actually found myself a little disappointed on Elvis's behalf. Not because I didn't want to hear him sing. Who doesn't want to hear Elvis sing? But because for the first time, I wanted Hollywood to trust the man. I wanted them to let him carry the film as an actor without constantly having to remind the audience, hey, it's Elvis. Come watch it. Hey, it's Elvis. He sings. When I discovered that Philip Dunn had later revealed the studio insisted that Elvis sing in the film, everything suddenly kind of clicked into place. The film I just watched felt caught between two different ambitions. It wanted to tell a thoughtful story about a troubled young man trying to rebuild his life, but it also had the biggest recording star in the world in its leading role. And 20th Century Fox clearly wasn't prepared to let audiences forget that. Perhaps that's why Wild in the Country occupies such an interesting place in Elvis's filmography. It's not quite the intimate character drama that it could have been, but it's also a long way from the glossy musical formula that would soon define so much of his Hollywood career. So when the credits rolled, I looked back through my notebook and realised something. The very first thing I'd written was, oh my God, it's Elvis. And then the very last page wasn't about Elvis at all. It was about Glenn Taylor. Somewhere over those 100 or so minutes, I stopped thinking about Elvis Presley and started caring about a young man who simply wanted the chance to build a better life for himself. But later that same year, Blue Hawaii became one of the biggest box office successes of Elvis Presley's acting career. Audiences loved it. The studios loved it. Colonel Parker loved it because Hollywood had finally found a formula that made an extraordinary amount of money. The musical comedies that were to follow and that I will talk about in future, because I do love them. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're terrible films. They're not. They're fun. And they're the ones that I grew up knowing about. They were hugely successful, but they rarely asked Elvis to stretch himself in the same way that King Creole, Flaming Star, and Wild in the Country did. Director Philip Dunn reflected on that many years later, saying audiences who wanted a serious drama didn't want Elvis and his songs, while Elvis fans were disappointed because it wasn't the kind of Elvis picture they expected. So he was kind of stuck, basically. He was stuck. But I'm really glad I watched Wild in the Country. It isn't my favourite Elvis film. I think I'd probably put King Creole up there first. I really loved that film. That was phenomenal. But what Wild in the Country gave me, though, wasn't something I was expecting, because when I pressed play, I saw Elvis Presley, and when the credits rolled, I saw Glenn Taylor. And for me, that makes Wild in the Country worth watching, because that's a phenomenal acting performance. If you've seen it, I'd love to know what you think in the comments below. I love our chats on here. It generally makes me so happy. I'm learning so much about Elvis and Hollywood and filmmakers and all the wonderful things on here through you guys, so thank you so much. Do you believe that it's one of Elvis's most underrated films, or is there another performance you think deserves another look? Let me know, because I can talk about that too. And if anything the last few months have taught me, it's that you guys, you Elvis fans, seem to know what Elvis thinks and Elvis films and Elvis songs I should talk about next. So let me know what you want me to talk about next, to discover next. I'm having truly the best time as an actor, as a filmmaker, as somebody who is deeply passionate about Hollywood and film. This has been such a joy so far. So I'm excited for more, and thank you all so much for being here. I hope you stay well. I'll stay well and you stay well, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.